bad about keeping up with this channel, but I wanted to touch base with a few things. First of all, some good news, which is I had a client come into my tattoo shop today, and we had a conversation previously about animals and what they go through to end up on our plates. And she's told me today, when we had a nice long discussion about her actively working on becoming vegan. So of course, as an activist, I prefer people to say I'm vegan right now. However, I understand that it's a process for some people. While morally, I would insist that she goes vegan, and I told her go ahead and just go vegan right now. She came with some questions, and that's good. So while I think that we absolutely have to insist that people stop using animals, period, I think that when people come with questions like, how do I do this? How do I, find an alternative to cheese? What I think is important is that we always come back to the fact that this is about the animals. And so that's what I did for her, right? I said, of course, it's great that you're, working on ending using animals in your dietary choices. And I reminded her, when I look at cheese or dairy, I think of what the animal goes through to end up where they are, which is in front of us in a supermarket. And so the point of me telling this story is to remind everybody that when you're doing activism, whether it's on a small scale, one-on-one, or whether you're doing street activism, make sure that you always bring it back to the animals, because that's what veganism is about, right? It's about making sure that we aren't abusing animals, which is what the meat, egg, and dairy industry does, right? It abuses animals, and then we pay for it, and then we become a cog in the wheel of abuse. So as I had this conversation with her, we talked about recipes and alternatives, and I reminded her that even if the options are bad, right? So we're talking about vegan cheese, which has a long way to go, although progress is being made. I'm the first person to say that I don't think most vegan cheese is great. It doesn't matter, right? I would rather not eat any type of cheese or not have any type of any product rather than use an animal's body to consume for food. So I reminded her of that, right? I remember what the animals went through, and I think you should too. And that's what keeps me from consuming animals, is remembering what they go through and remembering that the animals who are abused to end up on our plate, they are individuals. And that matters more than anything, right? So I can have a long conversation about alternatives for cheese and the different brands and how some of them melt and some of them shred and some of them don't, and the nutrition. We can have these conversations, and we talked about it. But what really matters is those animals suffer greatly to end up where they are, right? So, a cow is forcibly impregnated. She carries her baby for 9 months. The baby is taken away and slaughtered in order for us to steal the milk that she produced for her baby. She'll go through that every year for 5 years in a row, and then she herself will be slaughtered, even though she could have lived for 20 years. So those are the things that I think we have to come back to. And it doesn't matter if that sounds extreme, because it is extreme. Talking about it is an extreme. Doing it is extreme. Paying for it is extreme. And vegans out there listening, not pointing that out, staying silent when those things are happening, that's extreme. It's extreme, and we have to learn to not stay silent. We have to learn to speak up, right? We have to learn to have those hard conversations. And I'll tell you a little secret. The first few times that you speak up, it's going to be stressful, it's going to be scary, or it's going to be awkward, and you're not going to have answers, and you're going to be, stressing about what to say, and you're going to have to research after. But that's what we do, right? You have a conversation, it goes weird, and you go home, and then you research. What should I have said in that situation? You bounce the idea off another vegan, or you do research. You find out what to say next time. So make sure you're speaking up. Make sure you're always bringing it back to the animals. And, we ended the conversation on a positive note. I worked on her tattoo, and we said goodbye. I actually gave her a hug. Some clients are huggers, some aren't. She likes a hug, and I do too. So I gave her a hug and say goodbye. And I told her I'm glad that she's looking at going vegan, that she's working on going vegan. And we had those conversations, right? We had those conversations about what animals go through. And that's important. And that's what made her change her mind. It wasn't me going, oh, I'm a vegan, but, I totally understand why you're not. Or, I'm a vegan and I don't push it on anybody. Or, oh, yeah, well, I'm a vegan, I guess, but, I don't really like to talk about. No, I'm a vegan, and I'm a vegan because it's wrong to harm animals unnecessarily. It's wrong to forcibly inseminate an animal. It's wrong to kill their babies. It's wrong to throw day-old male chicks into a grinder. These things are wrong. And I don't care how it sounds. to other people who don't want me to speak. I will speak. I will not equivocate. I will not retreat a single inch, and I'll be heard. And I'll be heard with the intention of helping others understand what those animals go through and convincing them to give it up. So she did. She gave up so far. Apparently, according to her, she's given up meat, eggs, fish, and she's working on dairy. And hopefully after today, she will. And one more story, which is this. I have a healthcare provider who I see on a regular basis. She's a vegetarian, and she's not out there listening because I have 3 people that watch these videos. But she's a vegetarian, and vegetarians still pay for male chicks to be ground up alive, and they pay for female cows to be forcibly inseminated and have their babies killed. So when I went to go to my provider, I'm not necessarily in a position to be talking to her or quote unquote preaching to her about these things, but we had a conversation because it's important, right? And we talked about, she catches up with me and asks me what I'm doing in my life. Well, I'm doing a lot of vegan activism. She's a vegetarian, she told me, and I said, well, you should go vegan. And I asked her if she's vegetarian because she cares about animals, and she is. And I said, well, if you care about animals, you should know that female cows are forced. I told her what happens to cows. I told her what happens to chickens. And she told me, and I hope it's true, but she said, the next time you come in, I'll be vegan. And I hope that's true, and I really do. The point of both of these stories, which have happened in the last 2 days, is that these people that I'm speaking with, these wonderful people who are now aware of the suffering and the horror that happens to animals, they aren't going vegan because I quietly, shuffled in and mumbled that I'm plant-based, right? They're not going vegan because I said, well, I don't want to push my lifestyle on anybody. They're not going vegan because I said I don't want to be pushy and I don't want to be preachy. They're not going vegan because of those things. They're going vegan because I did it as diplomatically as possible, but I honestly confronted them in a polite, diplomatic way with what happens to animals. That's why these people are working on going vegan. And because, of course, they get the credit too, because something inside of them, they have an ability to look at their behavior and admit there's a problem and then change. So they get credit for sure. And this is about the animals, right? So what matters the most is that the animals are at the forefront of these discussions. It's not about health. It's not about the benefits to them. It's not about, being right or being wrong or being moral or immoral. None of that matters, right? What matters is the animals are suffering unnecessarily. And when you approach conversations with that absolute moral clarity, it is wrong to harm an animal unnecessarily. And people who are vegetarian, people who I interact with, they talk about how much they love animals. And the lady in my shop who was, talking to me today about going vegan, our first session, she talked to me about a bird that her and her son found and how they rescued it, and they sent it to a local bird sanctuary to help this bird get help, and then the bird ended up flying away, and they were worried because the bird was blind. This whole story, and I said, do you think there was something special about that bird? And she said, well, no, not necessarily. And I said, do you think that all birds experience, the sort of fear that bird may have experienced being blind? She said, yeah. And I said, well, what about chickens that we send into slaughterhouses? That's what I asked her. And so these type of tough questions, they matter, right? I don't necessarily think that change can come about as effectively or as quickly when we're shy, quiet, reserved, and worried about how we're going to be perceived. None of that matters. What matters is right now, animals are suffering, and they don't have to be. They're suffering because so many people out there do not know what animals go through to end up on their plates. They don't know about the gas chambers. They don't know about the forcible insemination. They don't know about the baby killing. They don't know about thumping, which is when you take a runt piglet and slam it into the concrete because it's not going to grow fast enough. These are all realities of what animals go through to end up on our plate, and people don't know. And here's the thing. Some people think that vegans, like myself, who are outspoken and who talk about the horrors in the animal agriculture industry, they think that we're negative, horrible people. But the truth is that I believe that people have to be good in their heart. I believe that. Because here's what I think. I talk about the horrors because I'm looking at people and saying, there's no way. There's no way. There's no way that they would know what happens to these animals and still choose to be a part of it, still choose for those things to happen under their name. They would not, because they must be good people. They must be good people. The world can't all be horrible monsters that would pay for these things to happen and not care. Most people. So while people ask why vegans, and especially like myself who talk about the horrors, why we're negative or come across talking about these horrors, it's not because we're bad and we're negative, it's because we believe that people are good. And when they read about those horrors or they hear about those horrors, they'll choose to not pay for them. We believe that, right? We believe that, activists. We believe that people are good and that they'll change. So in a way, while we come across as negative, it's actually a positive approach. I believe that my healthcare provider has this goodness inside of her that doesn't want those things to happen, and she has the ability to change. Same thing with my client. I could already tell that she had this goodness inside of her. She spent the day rescuing a bird, so wouldn't she spend a few moments a day rescuing those birds out of her plate, right? Preventing them from being bred into existence by paying into that system. So don't be afraid to talk about the things that happen in the animal agriculture industry. Don't be afraid to talk about gas chambers. Don't be afraid to talk about debeaking. Don't be afraid to talk about baby chicks being ground up alive, the forcible. Don't be afraid to talk about those things. Try it, struggle with it, feel awkward, and then try it again the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Learn how to say those words with confidence and clarity. Tell people and assume that they don't know. Assume, right? Give them the benefit of the doubt. Well, you're not vegan because you don't know what happens. Well, I'm going to tell you. And you had an excuse because you didn't know before we spoke. But now you don't. Now, ignorance can't be an excuse. Now you know. And now you have a responsibility to act on that knowledge. And that's what I think one-on-one activism comes down to. Providing that knowledge and holding people accountable. Now you know. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? All right. So that's my story about the last couple days. I am going to wind down, play some video games, and go to sleep. Hopefully, again, I always hope that these videos eventually reach somebody somewhere who needs to hear about vegan activism and who needs to hear those words, right? From one vegan to another, from one person, one animal abolitionist and animal liberation activist to another. Do not be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid, because remember, you're not wrong. You're just early, right? This is correct. This is morally correct. Not harming animals for taste pleasure is morally correct. Behave, carry yourself, speak with that knowledge and that confidence, with that moral clarity. It is wrong to harm animals unnecessarily, and therefore I don't. And therefore I don't think you should either. And now I'm asking you not to, right? I'm telling you what happens, and now you have a responsibility to act.